Flying Aces is the absolutely insane Intamin manufactured hypercoaster at Ferrari World in Abu Dhabi. As far as I'm concerned, this is the UAE's best roller coaster. It opened in 2016 as only the second roller coaster at the park after GT Challenge, and Intamin did not hold back with this one. Not only is it a hypercoaster, but it is a wing coaster, one of only two of its kind. The other one, Flying Aces' sister attraction, is actually more famous than Flying Aces. That would be Sky Rush at Hershey Park, opening in 2012. So this opened 4 years later, meaning they were able to fix some of the issues that Sky Rush had. Now, I was very familiar with this ride at Hershey Park. I rode it opening year and have been on it dozens of times. So I was super excited to ride Flying Aces for my first time, and I was blown away. If you were a fan of Sky Rush but hated those leg-crushing restraints or just wish the ride was a little longer, no need to fear. Flying Aces has the same restraints but does not crush your thighs and has an extra 1,300 feet of track. We're looking at just under 5,000 feet of track in total. This is a long ride and it takes advantage of every single moment. So let's dive into everything that makes Flying Aces work so well, and we'll give it a final score at the end of the video. Now, the first thing I want to really mention is just how cool this ride looks from the outside, because as I'm sure most of you guys know, Ferrari World is a completely indoor theme park, but they have several outdoor attractions. This is their second tallest roller coaster. Believe it or not, TurboTrack is actually 4 feet taller than Flying Aces. But while that is in the center of the park poking out through the roof, this is just this massive sprawling layout that you can see from the road. The ride can be identified by its all-white track and supports, same color scheme as Formula Rosa, and there's actually a good reason for it. It gets super hot in the desert, and because of that intense heat, they wanted to go with light colors, so then that way the track and supports aren't expanding. So that's also why the new Falcon's Flight roller coaster in Saudi Arabia will also be all white. But this thing still looks pretty epic. I will say it does not have the prominence that other hypercoasters have. Like for instance, I was recently at Thorpe Park and got to ride Hyperia. That's about 30 feet taller than Flying Aces, but it looks way bigger because it just towers over the other roller coasters surrounding it. Flying Aces may not be next to another roller coaster, but it is right behind a huge building that is Ferrari World that just doesn't quite put in perspective just how large this ride is. Now, once you're inside Ferrari World, the entrance to Flying Aces is in the back left corner. You have a biplane out front, which is your introduction to Flying Aces' theme, which is World War I fighter planes. Now, what exactly does that have to do with Ferraris? Well, it actually ties back into the origins of the Ferrari logo. Literally, as you're exiting the ride, they have a timeline showing off the different iterations of the logo. It's kind of neat. But this is one of the most impressive queues I have ever seen in my entire life. As you're walking through the line of Flying Aces, you will see planes, bunkers, crates, sleeping quarters, old newscasts, full-on rockwork, and literal trees. There's even an old musky smell, and they have these screens where you can see soldiers marching. It's a really cool effect, like they went above and beyond even though they didn't have to. One of my favorite queues in the entire world. It is worth noting that Ferrari World does have their own version of an express skip the line. During our 2 days at the park, one of those days we had skip the lines, the other we did not. You definitely see more of the queue when you go through the standby line. So what I recommend is if you do happen to have express when you go, if you've never seen the full queue, at least take a second to walk through it, even if you're not going to wait in that line. The longest wait I saw was like 75 minutes, maybe even 90 minutes. And that's because that's one train operations with a long ride and slow loading times. Some of the worst operations we saw in the entire UAE. I was really frustrated at times waiting for this thing. I want to say the average dispatch time was like 2 minutes and 40 seconds. So like I've definitely seen worse, like in some of those Asian countries, you'll wait a lot longer. But I've seen how fast Sky Rush operations can be. And it's just proof that you shouldn't need 3 minutes to send this thing out. The train setup is the exact same as Sky Rush's with 7 rows, 4 across, total of 28 passengers per train. Your center seats are slightly elevated while your wing seats that hang over the track are just a little bit lower. You'll pull down your lap bar. It looks identical to the ones that you used to have with Sky Rush before they changed out the restraints. But again, this does not crush your thighs. It actually sits at your waist. And then you'll buckle in your seatbelt and you are good to go. Now, up until this moment, you are in a completely indoor station. It's decently well lit, still themed, and then the doors in front of you open into the outside world, and you see that 207-foot tall lift hill staring up at you. And Flying Aces wastes no time at all. This ride has the single fastest lift hill in the entire world. The catch car under the train is attached to a cable and it just whips you up to the top in just over 10 seconds. This just chucks you over the first drop. You don't even have that much time to take in the view. It's crazy. It's like kind of scary how fast it is. Now, an exact angle of descent has not been released for Flying Ace's drop, but I know Skyrush has an angle of descent of 85 degrees, and this certainly looks similar, so I would not be shocked if it is the same or at least close. Not quite vertical, but it is one heck of a first drop. Absolutely incredible in the back row. If I had to choose which first drop I prefer, the one on Flying Aces or Skyrush, I would still take Skyrush because Skyrush's has a kink in it that it feels like it's not supposed to be there. That kink does not exist on Flying Aces, but still tons of ejector airtime. Now, while Skyrush throws you into an ejector speed hill immediately after that drop, Flying Aces instead has a non-inverting loop. And there's just so little time to breathe between the bottom of the drop and when you enter the non-inverting loop. I was graying out so hard. It's just that intense. You're hitting your max speed of 75 miles per hour. You're launched straight up at the sky. You roll over to the right and just keep rolling, then back down to the ground. It's a very good element. It is not personally my favorite non-inverting loop. I would give that to the one on DC Rivals. I think that one is whippier, but this is still very, very good. Probably my second favorite if I had to think about it. It's because of this element that I recommend sitting on the left side of the Flying Aces train. When you sit on the left wing, you are pulled over and around, versus if you sit on the right side, you're like tucked inward. So it's not as crazy of a maneuver. The left side has more tug to it. Specifically, I would say the back left is the best seat on Flying Aces. Following this non-inverting loop, you take this wide sweeping bank turn to the right, still feeling so much of that speed. You then have this nice ejector hill, not very high off the ground at all, awesome airtime, and then you turn around up against the building, rising up into your largest airtime hills. This is the one moment that I actually really enjoyed on the right side. I liked as you're rotating out of this moment, on the right, you're just hanging to the side. Because there's no shoulder harness on this thing, you just feel so exposed. And then when sitting in the back, you have this great drop and then a massive camelback hill. One of the best moments of airtime on Flying Aces. Now, overall, I would say Flying Aces layout is a little front heavy. The best moments are towards the beginning, and it's because those are the elements that really involve sending you up out of your seat. The second half of the ride is more about feeling the speed and some cool transitions, just staying low to the ground. So it's a very unique design. The second half almost more reminded me of like Intimidator 305, how that ride starts off tall and then just stays low the rest of the time. So following that camelback, you'll thread in between the non-inverting loop to your left and an old zipline tower to your right. There's this wide left-handed bank turn, and then you gradually twist into this little speed hill. This is where I get into one of my few critiques of Flying Aces. I really feel like this entry should have been tightened up. I just think it takes too long to twist out and drop down. It's just such a drawn-out slope. It felt like they were trying to stretch this element as long as possible. So following that, we have a bank curve to the left, a little bit of whip there. You're keeping that momentum, then rise up and then change directions to the right, banking over to that side, then switching again to the left, this time rolling over into an inversion. Surprise! Flying Aces goes upside down, because why not? It definitely doesn't make any sense. It is odd being in this layout. I don't think it was needed, but still a fun moment. It just felt like an afterthought. It was like, you know, we really should just go upside down at some point. And it's like, why? I don't know. So yeah, there's a Heartline roll. Flying Aces is one of the few hypercoasters to feature just one inversion. So following that, there's a bank curve actually underneath the roof of Ferrari World. You then flip now to the left. That's actually a pretty whippy transition. When you sit on the left there, you really get thrown to the side. I was actually like, holy crap, that's one of the whippiest transitions on the ride, and it's towards the end. Because following that, you just have a slight twist, and then you hit the brake run. And now you're back inside, returning to your station. Flying Aces is a very smooth roller coaster, and there are no trims to be found during that entire experience. Now, something that is worth mentioning is that POV video that you've been seeing this entire time was filmed as the first train of the day. So if you're seeing these elements and you're thinking, well, it looks a little slow, it's because, frankly, it was. That is the slowest iteration of Flying Aces that you will probably never experience because it was an empty train. Even the first train of the day, fully loaded with riders, is going to run faster than that. I can confidently say, when we were doing night rides, full train of passengers after it had been cycling all day, it was hauling, and I could not believe it. During my first rides on Flying Aces in the morning, I was like, you know, it's a very good ride, but I do think I like Skyrush more. But after those Flying Aces night rides, I can confidently say Flying Aces is the better roller coaster. Now, the one caveat to that is I have not actually experienced Skyrush since they changed out the restraints, but I've heard from some enthusiasts that they actually don't like the ride quite as much, but that's coming from people who were not bothered by the original restraints. So I wouldn't be surprised if I end up keeping with that stance. The two things I think that Skyrush does overall better is the first drop and that ejector hill immediately after the drop. Everything else, though, I like more on Flying Aces. I like that Flying Aces has a traditional camelback. I really enjoy the non-inverting loop. It absolutely has the stronger finale, and it was just addicting. I didn't want to stop riding Flying Aces. So I cannot recommend this ride enough. It absolutely exceeded my expectations, and I am super sad that I live very far away from it because I wish I could ride this more often. So for Flying Aces' final score, I am giving it a 10 out of 10. It is one of the best roller coasters I've ever ridden. Any nitpicks I brought up are minuscule. In the grand scheme of things, they're not that important. Biggest recommendations, sit in the back left wing seat and try and ride it later in the day. Still awesome in the morning, but it is a different animal at night. And luckily for us, Ferrari World has some pretty long operating hours, so that is absolutely a possibility. So let me know down in the comments below if you've experienced Flying Aces at Ferrari World, if you agree with the points that I brought up, and if you think there's anything I missed, be sure to post that down below. And stay tuned for more here at Coaster Studios, and I'll see you next time.